Last week on Budget Night, we heard from the finance minister, the opposition critics, and the world of small business. Tonight, we follow up by hearing from three longtime policy analysts. What's their take on a budget that will spend more money and go deeper into deficit than any previous budget, and by a mile? Is it enough to save the economy, and will it be worth it when those bills come due? Let's ask. In Burlington, Ontario, Craig Alexander. He's chief economist and executive advisor at Deloitte. And in the provincial capital, in Little Italy, there's Sheila Block, senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And in Riverdale, Drew Fagan, a former deputy minister in the Ontario government, now professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T. And it's great to have you three on our airwaves again. Let us, I was just about to say, in case you missed the finance minister's speech last week, but I'm pretty sure you three did not. But on the chance that some of our viewers did, here's Rod Phillips from last week. Sheldon, if you would.
Ideally, governments, like families, budget prudently during good times in order to have flexibility in tough times. Unfortunately, that didn't always happen in Ontario. But the good news is that our government made significant progress towards a sustainable financial path before COVID-19. That progress enables our $45 billion response as outlined in today's budget. As the people understand, the current level of government spending is neither sustainable nor desirable in the long run. But as a global pandemic continues around the world, it is absolutely necessary today. Mr. Speaker, our deficit is projected to be $38.5 billion, unchanged from what I reported in the first quarter finances this summer. We are projecting that the deficit will decrease to $33.1 billion next year and $28.2 billion the following year.
Now, I have heard it said in politics that the public can get its head around the notion of charging taxpayers $16 for a glass of orange juice. But $38.5 billion is just too big a number and too incomprehensible for anybody to understand. So that's where we bring you three in. Sheila, start us off. How should we react to a number that big?
I think we really have to put that number in context. We are facing a public health crisis that we really haven't seen in this country for at least 100 years. We are facing an economic crisis that is a result of that public health crisis. As a result, the demands on government are much larger and needed than they have been since that time. And so I think that's the kind of context that we need to take this into. And a lot of our regular metrics will be hard-pressed to compare them to. So I absolutely think we have to take it into that bigger context.
Craig, what's your view on it?
The reason you run prudent fiscal policy during good economic times is so you can actually afford to respond to a crisis. And I think the real challenge that Ontario has had is that heading into the pandemic, its finances were extraordinarily weak. And as a consequence, this has constrained their ability to respond. But nevertheless, the government did absolutely the right thing. It did a 180-degree shift from being a government that was aiming to balance the books in 2023 to a government that was willing to accept record deficits for several years. And so if you think about it, pre-pandemic, the government was running a deficit of $9 billion or tracking a $9 billion deficit this year. It's now going to be $38.5 billion, but that's the price tag for fighting the pandemic. And so it's completely understandable, it's reasonable, and while the government's finances are unsustainable, it's something that we had to accept. So it's really going to be a challenge as in terms of the path forward, but the government is trying to be pragmatic in terms of balancing how big the deficit gets and also addressing the pandemic.
Drew, in any other times, in other words, in more normal times, this kind of number would be unthinkable. And so my question for you is, in your conversations with your former colleagues in the public sector or in government or in academia or in the world of economics, do you find anybody today who's saying, oh my goodness, $38.5 billion, that number is outrageous and unacceptable?
Well, I think there's concern about the number. It is, a record deficit, and it's high even compared to previous crises. So it's twice what the deficit was during the financial crisis of 2009-10. And it took years for that deficit to decline. In fact, we never really got back into the black. We got to the edge of that a few years ago. So part of the challenge is the size of the deficit at $38 billion and the expectation that it'll take years to get that deficit back under control. As Craig noted, this new government had a plan to balance the budget by 2023-24. Now that's out the window. It's likely to take a few more years. And that is challenging in the medium term, as Minister Phillips admitted.
Sheila, it's going to take probably more than a few years to get back to balance. There's no plan to get back to balance in this budget. The government, I guess, intends to pass a law giving them an exemption from the law that requires them to show a path back to balance. Do you find that problematic?
I think what I mostly find problematic is if it's a government that is concerned about getting back to balance, why did they bake $1 billion a year tax cut into this budget? So I think absolutely I agree with Craig that government needed to step up. It did step up. We're not certain whether it stepped up in the right ways or sufficiently. But if you want to get back to balance, you have to look at both sides of the ledger. And this budget included permanent tax cuts and temporary spending measures.
Craig, are you as offended as Sheila with those $1 billion worth of tax cuts?
Oh, I think the tax cuts that are in the budget are basically part of the effort to help support businesses during these difficult times. And as is the electricity subsidy that was also provided in the budget. I mean, if we think about the impact of the pandemic on businesses, the federal government's doing a lot of the heavy lifting through things like the wage subsidy for businesses that have had a large drop in their revenues. The federal government has also expanded access to credit through Business Development Canada and Export Development Canada. And so there is a lot of federal efforts to help support business. So I really think what the government did was sort of look at what could they do to reduce the cost on business in the near term. And so those tax cuts are part of that effort.
Drew, you want to break the tie here?
Yeah, well, $1 billion is not insignificant, but and it's a big number, but it's on a base of $150 billion with regard to the size of the spending generally, or a little bit more. So, by and large, what they've done here is increase spending to a great extent. Even, some months ago, they were planning for an increase in $20 billion in spending. Now it's bigger still. Deficit hasn't changed from a few months ago, but it's substantial, right? So whether they got the balance right, it's largely been on the spending side. There's another point to make, I think, with regard to the deficit, and that is we really need to think of the federal deficit and the provincial deficit together. And we're now, in terms of debt as a share of GDP, at about 100%. The debt of the federal government and the provincial government is roughly about the size of the economy. That's a big number. And it's not that we can't handle it now, but if there, as you noted earlier, a trend in the medium term with regard to a continuing and taking years to get it towards zero, that could pose a real challenge.
Well, that's a good point. Let me pick up on that because, as Drew correctly points out, there's a number of different ways to measure the size of a deficit and or debt. One is the pure number. $38.5 billion is a big number. The other way to measure it is as a percentage of the gross domestic product, as a percentage of the value of the economy. And on that scale, the debt to GDP ratio is going from 39.7%, which is where it is right now. This is Ontario only, to 49.6%. There, we've got the chart up right now. 39.7% today, going within a few years up to almost 50%. And I guess I want to know whether or not that rings alarm bells for any of you. Sheila, how about that?
So perhaps unsurprisingly, it doesn't ring too many alarm bells for me. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I go back to this is an unprecedented time where we really need governments to step up. The second thing to note is that the cost of borrowing has actually decreased. And so despite the big increase in the deficit, the Ontario government's interest costs have not increased from last year to this year. So that's how much that cheaper borrowing is having an impact on the affordability of carrying that debt. And I think the third issue is that we've seen that both the federal government and the Bank of Canada have really indicated a willingness to step in and step up and support provincial governments. So Well, I don't find this alarming, and I think it's really an indicator of how things have changed. If you would have asked me this pre-pandemic, I might have had a different answer to your question.
No, I understand. But Craig, let me get you to follow up in this respect. We're going to borrow $12.5 billion this year to pay off the interest on our debt. And we're going to pay the same number next year, despite the fact that we're going to borrow $38.5 billion more, which does go to show you that we're really catching a good break when it comes to low interest rates. So by that measure, should the debt to GDP ratio scare us as much as some people are afraid of it?
Well, it shouldn't worry us as much as if interest rates were higher. So the debt service costs are not insignificant, but because interest rates have fallen so much, it's actually allowing governments to carry much bigger deficits and debt loads than they have in the past. But that still doesn't mean you shouldn't be mindful of the amount of debt that governments are taking on. So, for example, in the budget, the government says that in 2022, it expects to be paying roughly $14 billion in interest on the debt that it's issued. That's $14 billion that's not going into education or healthcare or other social priorities. And so even with a sustained low interest rate, the amount of debt that's being taken on is going to carry a cost. And yes, the Bank of Canada is currently buying significant amounts of provincial debt, helping to keep interest rates low. But the reason they can do that is that money isn't circulating like normal. So one of the questions I often get is, with the Bank of Canada buying federal and provincial debt, is this going to cause inflation? Because what they're effectively doing is increasing the amount of money in the financial system. And the answer is that it doesn't cause inflation when the money isn't going into spending and investment. And if you look at, for example, household finances, the amount of deposits that Canadians have has gone from $50 billion pre-COVID to $416 billion. And what that does is it really shows you that the money in the system isn't flowing normally. So what's going to happen is, as the recovery hopefully continues, the Bank of Canada will gradually reduce its bond buying program in order to ensure that we don't have an inflation problem down the road. But when that happens, it can actually increase the cost of borrowing for provinces. And when we think about the Ontario situation, the government is going to have to issue bonds not only to pay for the current pandemic measures and the deficit, the $38.5 billion deficit, but they're also going to have bonds that come to maturity. So in terms of bond issuance, it looks to me like the government of Ontario is going to be issuing probably more than $100 billion of bonds. And then the question is going to be, at what interest rates are investors willing to buy that debt? And so ultimately, there's no question that these are enormous deficits, and Ontario is adding a lot to debt. Interest rates will remain low, and that means that it's affordable in the near term. But we do have to recognize that one of the great legacies from fighting the war against COVID is going to be a lot of Ontario debt.
Drew, let me get you to pick up the story from there. In this respect, these progressive conservatives obviously did not get elected back in June of 2018 with a view to bringing in the largest spending budget of all time and the biggest deficit of all time. In fact, they were brought in to put the books back into shape. So put your former deputy minister's hat back on right now and give us a sense about how the public service is reacting to having to deal with stuff that they certainly never saw coming down the pipe when this government first got elected.
So first of all, I was talking to a former colleague this morning, and she noted they're working around the clock, right? I mean, they're lucky to be in the position they are with, solid jobs and responsibility, but it's hard work right now, working through everything. And of course, they had to respond in March and throughout in the same way the political class has by, changing their stripes in effect or changing their perspective. And it's been all hands on deck for the last little while. So it's the question is kind of, part of it is their coordination and how hard they're working with regard to this. Part of it is working with their political leaders as they change their perspective. And, I think the finance minister recognizes the challenge they're in. The government has tried to thread that needle. One statistic that can jump out at people when you say it, and it maybe sounds a little scarier than it is Ontario's the most indebted subnational government in the world. And you heard that rhetoric from the PC party when it took power and during the election campaign. Part of that is because Canada is a very decentralized country and there's a lot of responsibility at the provincial level. But certainly within the bureaucracy, there's a focus on the programs that we need to roll out to deal with this crisis, but also a focus on how you respond in, economists call the medium term. How do we grow back better? How do we grow faster as an economy? Because the longer term challenge for Ontario is it doesn't really have as a competitive an economy as it should have. Our GDP per capita, our living standards aren't as high as surrounding jurisdictions. And I think was to be the focus of the government, this government and the bureaucracy. They've been knocked off that by the crisis. I think they'd love to get back to that, because the truth is we've had a generation in which we've been on a slow and steady decline province-wide.
Sheila, can I get you to react to this notion of whether you think the public service is up to the task of these are simply unprecedented times for anybody who's in the public service today, and whether they are up to the task of dealing with it. What do you think?
Well, I think what we've seen throughout this pandemic is how public servants have, in fact, stepped up. We've seen at the federal level policies being developed and being refined throughout. I think my question would be more, how much are civil servants being constrained in what they can do creatively and in how they could respond by their political leadership? And I think this government has hung back and is, we had the report from the Financial Accountability Office that said 97% of spending in Ontario for the pandemic has been as a result of the federal government, 3% from the provincial government. We have seen this budget looks a lot to me like an open for business budget. So absolutely, I think we need some very creative solutions to deal with what I think the two fundamental dilemmas that the pandemic have exposed here. One of which is that we have a great deal of inequality in our economy. And the other is we have very threadbare both social safety nets and public services. And I believe public servants are up to the task, but they need their political leadership to unleash them.
All right, that's where I'll get Craig to pick up on the next part of the story, which is, basically every government in the Western world right now is spending bigly, if I can steal a line, bigly, trillions of dollars in order to fight the ravages of this global pandemic. The question we've got to ask is, are they spending it on the right things? You've seen, Craig, how the government intends to spend $187 billion over this fiscal year. Are they spending it on the right things, in your view?
Well, one of the areas where obviously spending has gone up enormously is in the healthcare system. And first and foremost, we're fighting a pandemic, and that has to be job number one. I think Ontario's big challenge is that we're seeing rising infection rates right now. The infection rates have increased quite dramatically as we've gone through the reopening, as kids have gone back to school, as the colder weather is arriving, and as COVID sort of fatigue has set in. And so one of the great concerns from an economist point of view is, are we going to be able to keep our businesses open and at the same time manage the health risks? I think that, one of the lessons that we have from other jurisdictions is that what we really need to see is more testing and also contact tracing. Now, the federal government is providing funding in that area, but I have to be honest, I'm an economist, not a health expert, so I don't actually know whether we're investing enough in the healthcare system at the moment. I don't know. This is we're talking about a budget, and a budget is about where you're spending money. So if you told me that the amount we're spending is restricting our ability to do testing and contact tracing, well, I'd say we need to spend more on that. But if the answer is that money isn't the challenge, well, then no, we don't. So it's hard during a pandemic to actually look at the government finances and say, are they exactly spending in the right areas? I mean, I think the first priority is healthcare. The second priority is helping support the economy. And so things in this budget that do that are things like promising funding to help support some hard hit areas like the tourism sector, like arts and sports and cultural and industries like that are going to be hit the hardest, and they're going to be the slowest to recover.
And that was all in the budget. There were provisions in the budget for those things.
And similarly in the budget, there's money for skills training. And we are going to have a lot of workers that experience long-term unemployment. We saw that in last Friday's job numbers. And so as a consequence, we're going to need to help those workers upskill and reskill so that they can get back in the labor market. The question might not be money. It could be that we need to actually do a better job in terms of aligning the skills that workers are getting with the labor market needs. So, I think that the government, I think this budget from a spending point of view is trying to be pragmatic about the fiscal realities, but at the same time trying to invest in core areas. We've had a big shift in the economy to digital. So one of the big things that's in the budget is expansion of broadband, and particularly in rural Ontario. And I think that given the shift to digital, given the shift to remote work, this is the right thing to do. So there's things to like and things to dislike in the budget, but you can see how they're actually trying to invest in ways that support the economy and deal with the health crisis. I would pick up though on the thought that the way we get out of this fiscal, the fiscal mess we're in, is ultimately stronger growth.
Well, let me get to Drew on that, because
we need a pro-growth strategy. That's really what we need.
You have read my mind, because that takes us right to Drew Fagan, because he's just co-authored a couple of policy studies which basically offer a blueprint or a roadmap for the government of Ontario. I suspect you'd love them to take your papers and just steal all the ideas in there and enact them, Drew. But why don't you give us some of the bullet point highlights of what you think a smart Ontario government going forward would do to reignite the economy in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, and to think about the future, let's just situate ourselves here. And I think it surprises Ontarians that if we compare the size of our economy to states that we look to, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, we've been hearing those states over the last week, incessantly. We're a smaller economy. We were the average size of the 7 states surrounding us 30, 40 years ago. We are now the poorest, as average GDP per capita. I'm not saying at the low end, and certainly the extremes of American society may not be something we want to replicate. But and that comes out of weak business investment, weak R&D investment, weak productivity, and those numbers have tracked for quite a while. What do we do to goose growth somewhat back to what we had 20, 25 years ago? Everybody's facing that, but we've been on a slow, steady decline to a greater extent. And we need to think about inclusive growth. And the people at Queen's Park, you asked me about the public servants, they're thinking about this quite a bit. And that was really what they were focusing on with regard to regulations, with regard to increased childcare, with regard to infrastructure investment, we need to emphasize. We talked about broadband investment just a second ago. Huge amounts going into transit, highways to a lesser extent, and other sectors as well. But we have to ask ourselves whether we're making the right investments and doing it effectively. There's one other thing that really surprised me when we were looking at this, and that is about 30 of the 60 states and provinces in the United States and Canada have actually done growth plans, 5-year growth plans. Some of us used to think of those as almost Soviet, but it's remarkable that virtually half the states in the United States, red states as well as blue states, have done growth plans to emphasize the sectors and to focus on the sectors and subsectors that we should be thinking about more. And that might be something, Saskatchewan's done it. We looked at Illinois intensively. That might be something that Ontario wants to look at. Part of the challenge with Ontario is that even as we look out in Toronto and see the cranes and the steady growth and the tech investment and things like that, almost all the job growth over the last decade in Ontario has been in Toronto and Ottawa. Outside those two centers, there's been almost no job growth. We really need to think about inclusive growth going forward. And that's really, thank you, that paper was all about.
Inclusive growth. Okay, Sheila, based on what you're looking at, do you see policies being put in place that will bring us inclusive growth going forward?
Unfortunately, I don't see it. And I think when we look at, again, the big picture from this pandemic, it's racial inequality, it's income inequality, and it's really what a frayed public service and public sector we have at the moment. And I think at this point, with infection rates where they're at, that we really need to switch strategy. The government at this point is just hoping to have a private sector-led both recovery and period to get us through the pandemic. We are nowhere close to the end of this pandemic, unfortunately. We need government to lead, and we need government to lead in terms of both economic growth and in terms of addressing these huge inequalities, both in health outcomes and in economic outcomes.
Craig, last minute to you on whether or not we're getting the policies we need for inclusive growth.
We're moving in the right direction. I mean, when we look at where the job losses have been, it's been disproportionately low-paid workers. And when we look at who, what comprises the population that works within low-paid jobs, what you can see is, there's more women, there's more youths, there's more visible minorities, there's more newcomers that are in those jobs. And so there's no question that this recession has had a very strong inequality dimension to it. I think part of the government response in terms of the Canadian the Canadian emergency income benefits, where you're getting $500 a week. Basically what you're doing is you're maintaining the income that you're replacing the income that those low income workers were making. And so I think we are seeing programs and policies that are designed to address some of that inequality. One of the things that was in the federal throne speech was expansion of early learning. I think one of the lessons from the current crisis is the importance of childcare for letting parents work. And this actually creates an opportunity. Like, this is an enormous opportunity for us to invest in high quality, accessible, affordable early learning that will not only help parents, but also help build more resilient kids to be the workers of the future. Similarly, we're seeing other programs that are designed to sort of help break down barriers. Like, this is the example on the skills side, right? We need to not only invest in skills, but we need to ensure that the skills that workers are getting are the ones that the market needs. And so that's not a budget item. That's actually a program configuration. Yeah. So and we do need, like, again, this goes back to the Build Back Better narrative, right? I agree with Drew. Ontario and Canada was not on the road to prosperity pre-COVID. Right? We were having slowing trend rates of economic growth that were going to mean that standards of living weren't going to rise more than 1% a year. And that means that Ontarians wouldn't feel like they're getting ahead. And this is how you get political outcomes you don't want, like Brexit and Trump. So, we really need to change the trajectory. And the great thing about, the silver lining of the pandemic is that it's creating the opportunity to have a really constructive conversation around change. How do we build a more prosperous future? How do we break down barriers facing our people? How do we attract more investment? How do we get more capital spending? How do we boost economic growth? And I talk to businesses across the country, and I am impressed by management teams really thinking about how they're going to reform their business models in quite significant ways. Similarly, everything is on the table with government now. You can have a constructive dialogue about what do we need to do to create more prosperity? We're going to lose a lot of small businesses. I think one of the priorities is going to be, how do we foster more startups? How do we actually get more businesses reopened or started again or launched to make up for the businesses that don't survive the pandemic?
Craig, I'm jumping in here because the biggest reality is the clock, which yields for no person, no economist, including yourself. That's Craig Alexander from Deloitte, Sheila Block from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Drew Fagan from the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Thanks to all of you for coming on to TVO tonight and helping us out with this. Thanks.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.